The details of pottery, the history of painting on fabric, and the features of creating a textile doll. We will talk all about it in The Art of Making. These funny, bright dolls and fashionable outfits are the work of a doll maker, Akmaral Juldasova. The technique in which they are made is not new, but still popular, and it combines several different techniques. The dolls that I make are called Snezhka. They are similar in technique to the tilde doll. Both tilde and Snezhka are textile dolls, and probably this is the only similarity they share. There are many differences, both in terms of shape and methods of creation. Snezhka's body parts are proportional, while tilde has more elongated and long limbs. A special thing of Snezhka is that there is nothing on the doll's face except cheerful eyes. Akmaral began making dolls a little more than 3 years ago, and everything began with a desire to make a pretty toy for her daughter. After watching several master classes, she created her first dolls by trial and error.
Я стала искать информацию, нашла.
I started looking for the information. I found a pattern on the internet. Cut it out. I sewed the doll. But I didn't like it, and I made a little improvement on the design for myself.
Немножко ноги там укоротила, руки.
I shortened the legs and hands a little bit. And this is how I started sewing.
Первую куклу я шила для дочери, а потом стала шить.
The first doll I made was for my daughter. I gave the rest of the dolls I made to my friends and relatives. So my hobby turned into a business.
Мое увлечение перешло в такой небольшой, как бы, заработок, можно сказать.
The first dolls were not easy to make. She couldn't draw the image, or the designed outfit did not fit, and it could have taken a whole week for a master to make one doll. Now the doll maker manages to make it in 2 days. According to the finished patterns, all the details of the future Snezhka are drawn. But first you need to prepare all the materials. The most important thing is to choose the right fabric.
Основной материал для тела куклы.
The main fabric for the body of the doll and for sewing its clothes. Then the details of the doll are cut out. The work pieces are then filled with hollow fiber. After filling it, the doll is assembled. At first sight, it seems easy to make such a doll. The fabric is simple and inexpensive, but the stability of the doll depends on proper proportions of the elements and whether the filler is tightly placed in all parts.
Все детали готовы. Будем приступать к сборке.
Now all the details are ready.
Собираются ноги.
We'll start the assembling.
С помощью ниток и пуговиц.
First of all, we assemble the legs, like this. To do this, we need reinforced threads and buttons. This kind of assembly allows the doll to stand and sit.
Далее мы пришиваем голову. Крепим ее.
Then we fix the head with a reinforced thread folded into several layers.
Несколько сложений. Такой способ крепления головы позволяет нам.
This method allows the head to rotate left and right. The doll itself is soft and is made of textiles, but if necessary, the doll maker can strengthen it with a metal frame.
Я иногда вставляю каркас.
I sometimes put the frame in the hands. This allows them to be flexible and bent in their elbows, and the doll can hold something in its hands.
Или какую-то игрушку.
Clothing design is another important creative stage in making of the doll. All outfits, from fashionable skirts or dresses to shoes and knitted hats, Marel sews and knits on her own. But the final image of the doll depends on the proper location of its eyes.
Для того, чтобы нарисовать нам глазки,
In order to draw them, we need to outline the eyes. To do this, we put a hat.
и намечаем.
Then with a pen, we decide where the eyes will be. And if everything suits us, then we draw them with special paint on the fabric. You can place the eyes closer to each other or a little bit far from each other. This changes the whole image of the doll.
Специальности художника я не получала, и рисовать конкретно какие-то образы у меня.
I'm not an artist, and I don't know how to draw images in advance.
Образ сам по себе, он складывается и вырисовывается.
But when I get to work, the image itself comes together. In the process, it can change.
Может поменяться цвет.
The doll's outfit may change. And in the end, it will not turn out to be what it was planned.
В другом образе. Не то, что было ранее запланировано. Вот эта куколка, она сшилась изначально.
This doll was planned in a trouser suit, but the pants didn't fit, and I used a skirt. The skirt of this doll is sewn from veiling. The sweatshirt is sewn from knitted fabric. The eyes are painted with special acrylic paint for fabric, and if you rub them like this, they won't be erased.
Даже вот потереть, они не стирутся.
While making dolls, I forget about everything and completely immerse myself in the process. I can't stop thinking of the idea of what the doll will be like, what kind of result I will get. Most of all, I'm pleased that it can become a favorite doll for the future owner, Akmaral says.
Мне не терпится узнать результат конечный. Мне хочется
I can't wait to see the results. I want to share it. First of all, I share it with my daughter and my husband. They're happy for me. And if something doesn't work out, they give me clues.
Помогает мне в этом тоже.
You can play with my dolls. People buy them for little girls. They take them everywhere and go to kindergarten and on a visit. They're holding hands with them all the time.
За ручку. Когда я узнаю, что мои куколки стали другом.
When I hear that my doll became a friend for some little girl, I am happy with the fact that the doll found its home and a loving owner who will protect her.
И свою любящую хозяйку, которая не даст ее в обиду.
Pottery has a truly fascinating property. You can take your eyes of a process during which an ordinary lamp of clay turns into a beautiful bowl or a jug. Since ancient times, people have used clay to make the necessary household items, containers, and dishes. Over time, a pottery wheel was invented, as well as the methods of firing, appearance of new objects and numerous products for construction and household use. Potters began to create jewelry and souvenirs. The hero of our program, Daniyar Babashov, will tell us about the amazing properties of clay and will create an original product, a real work of art.
Қазір біздің жасайтынымыз декоративті интерьерге қоюға арналған сәнді шайнек жасаймыз.
Now I will demonstrate how to make an interior decorative teapot. We're going to need clay to set up in the middle of the pottery wheel.
Оны айналдыру арқылы
Once I fix the clay on the pottery wheel, I will begin to sculpt the bottom of a teapot, then a bowl, a handle, a teapot's neck, and a lid.
жасауға кірісеміз.
Pottery production technology consists of two parts: the formation of a ceramic product and its stitching round. The first is divided into 4 stages: centering the clay mass, opening the lamp, wall lifting, and forming the item. Stitching round goes after the previous process. Centering is perhaps the most difficult part. The main piece of clay is pressed in the center, then water is added. When squeezing a lump of clay, it's necessary to make the clay soft, so it follows the hands, as Potter says. From the very beginning of the process, it's necessary to wet the clay with water so that it won't stick to the hands. Gradually, an internal cavity is built up, kneading and pushing the clay up and down. By working with clay in this way, we give the desired shape to the future product. Now I'm going to start making the bottom of the teapot, and I'm going to need a modeling stick, and then I'm going to work on making the main bowl. First, a lump of clay is shaped, then the excess clay is removed. The potter checks with his fingers how well the blank is centered. Then gradually tapering, it turns into a cone. Then the potter presses on the center, opening the hole. Flattening the clay with its fingers down the aces reaches the bottom of the vessel. At this stage, the bottom and walls are given a uniform thickness. Now I'm starting the process of preparing a teapot's bowl. I will make it on the next pottery wheel. Here it's also important to maintain the center of the clay. To give it a shape, the clay is pushed upwards, pressed with the left hand on the central part to make a cavity. The potter wraps the pot from all sides and smoothly shifting his fingers to the center forms the walls. Lifting walls is a rather difficult stage. It's important to learn to feel the thickness of the wall. And it must be even throughout the height of the product. Every touch of the fingers makes the wall thinner and the vessel continues to grow. The next step is narrowing the neck. The pot is wrapped in a familiar movement and is compressed. At this stage, the fragile part of the future product may crack, and it needs to be dried a little. Now we have to remove the excess clay from the outside, gently shifting the modeling stick. It will give it a smooth finish. And now the finishing touches. After removing the excess clay, the vessel is aligned with a modeling stick and separated from the wheel using a pottery string. Next is the process of connecting the base of the teapot and the bowl. Having treated the outer bottom with a special tool and wetting it with water a little, these parts are glued. In the same way, the potter makes the neck of the teapot on which the lid will later sit. This procedure requires patience and concentration of attention. In order for the lid to perfectly cover the neck, it's necessary to calculate the diameter, form a protrusion, clean it, and grind it. After that, the potter will begin to make a neck and the handle of the teapot. After creating the shape of the neck, the surplus is trimmed and the final shape is given. Now the position of the neck is marked on the teapot and holes are made with a special tool. The parts are then joined and the seams are grounded to perfect smoothness. The handle remains to be attached. To make the teapot beautiful and elegant, it must be decorated. In this case, we will decorate it with a picture of pigeons. It will be placed on the lid and on a handle. Pigeons are sculpted manually. After completing this process, they're dried at room temperature for 3 days, after which they're sent to the potter's kiln. In the workshop, the product is fired in the potter's kiln, heated to 800 Celsius in several stages. The first heating takes from 150 to 200 Celsius for 2 hours. During the second heating, the temperature is adjusted to 1050 Celsius. Due to the high firing temperature, the teapot is very strong, despite all its apparent fragility. And clay qualities allow you to keep the water in the teapot warm for a long time.
Күйіп шыққан шәйнектің сыртын
After firing, the teapot is covered with a multicolored glaze.
түстердің барлығы пешке
In ceramics, the most interesting thing is that after glazing, the product has a uniform tint, and after sintering, it acquires different shades. It's worth mentioning that glazing not only gives a product a beautiful look, but also makes it waterproof. At the final stage, the teapot is covered with glaze by spray method using a brush with needles. The potter can choose dipping, watering, depending on his own preferences.
біздің жасап шыққан шәйнегіміз керамиканың барлық технологиясы
The clay teapot is done.
толықтай аяқталды.
It's now ready for use. Pottery is an incredible and fascinating experience. This type of applied art can be called an antidepressant hobby. Putting your hands in clay, you can easily distract yourself from the outside world and focus on internal resources. Try yourself to sit behind the pottery wheel. We are sure that you will experience an amazing feeling creating your own masterpiece from clay. Today we will learn about Batik, the ancient and beautiful technique of drawing on cloth, and the artist Alena Kolomytsova will help us learn more about it.
Ну, вообще искусство-то достаточно древнее, оно датируется...
In fact, it's quite an old art. It appeared around the beginning of the millennium. There are, for example, samples of Malaysian batik, which is still performed in a quite traditional way. And the word batik itself comes from Austronesian group of languages and is translated as make a dot. That is, the dot was set with molten wax and the cloth was dyed in different colors. Thus, a multicolor image was obtained. To this day, Malaysian and Indonesian batik keeps a lot of traditions. In China, silk painting is very common. Japan is famous for its kimono, a slightly specific painting different from other species. Well, we see a modern batik which is more dependent on modern materials. They are great now. They allow you to do work quickly and you can get very interesting effects. So we're starting to work on a silk handkerchief made in the batik technique.
Ну, для того, чтобы начать работу над платком, нам нужно сначала натянуть шелк.
In order to begin work on the handkerchief, we will need to pull the silk first. The paint is watery and the fabric can fall under its weight, so the work is done on the frame. Now we will pull the silk. There are different types of silk, thick or almost transparent. Well, for those techniques that I chose today, this silk is probably the most convenient. In order to create a product in the batik technique, you don't have to use only silk fabric. Any fabric will do. If we look at the works I made, you can see different types of fabric. I have both silk and chiffon and cotton fabrics too. There is also a separate type of beautiful painting on dense fabrics using dense textile paints. You can even paint denim, and it's quite diverse. Now there are so many fabrics that there are virtually no restrictions in the material which you can draw on. The next step in creating a batik is to choose the necessary paints. There won't be a wide range of colors, only a few basic shades, since the white silk canvas will soon be decorated with beautiful poppies. If you are a beginner, then there are beautiful iron paints, that is, an iron fixing method. There are several works made using this technique. These paints are quite easy to use. In other words, you pulled it, painted, ironed it, and everything is fine, and you can further wash the product, and it's ready for use. There are other types of paints, for example, stem fixing paintings. They give a more intense color. There are many options while using this technique, but they require much more time, since they need to be fixed with steam at a certain temperature. Today we're watching painting using a steam fixing technique. The pattern itself is created within 40 minutes. Then the time is needed for drying and steaming. And now the product is ready for use. But the technique that takes the longest time is the hot batik technique, when, according to traditional technology, the reservation of silk fragments occurs thanks to a molten paraffin or a wax. Such batik can take half a day, 6 to 8 hours. Sometimes you leave them specially for the next day, because every layer needs to dry.
Есть еще варианты узелкового батика, вот сейчас тоже очень много популярно.
There is also a method of knot batik, which is very popular now. It's called tie-dyeing. It's when you take dry pigments, ice, and you tie the t-shirt into different knots. You add a pigment, you put ice in it, and then it becomes colored.
Интересная штука есть. Там очень долго, большое время.
There is such an interesting thing. But you have to keep in mind that it takes a lot of time to bind the fabric into knots, not just to tie it, but to make a drawing. And such stages sometimes takes a lot of time.
Прокрашивание уже как бы живопись. А свободное вот когда.
The coloring itself happens quite quickly. This is when you just pour colors and let them flow. And there is also a technique when you paint with thin brushes. The whole work process can take up to a week.
Она тоже может занимать до недели работы.
How many batik techniques are there in the world?
Ну вот жестко описать невозможно. Есть два классических способа, которые...
It's hard to describe. There are two classical ways that have been divided since the beginning of the 20th century. Until that time, it was believed that there was a hot batik on wax. Japanese batik on couch was always a separate part. There was a starchy work on the silk, which turns into practically paper, and they work on it. Then there was a cold batik. This is a contour batik when we take a special reserve composition and outline the drawing. This allows the paint not to spread. There are many additional couches, preserving pastes, and now there are a lot of techniques of batik.
В свободном батике, да, в таком очень не жестком названии, там масса техник.
The specialist of batik technique, Alena Kolomytseva, sprinkles the drawing with salt to create an unusual effect. Salt absorbs excess moisture, and beautiful miniature patterns appear on the fabric.
Батиком может заняться не только.
Batik can be done not only by an artist, but also by someone who simply wants to work with their hands. I had so many students who came to do this just for themselves. They were interested in making a beautiful product. Now they are doing great, using different development of images and technologies. This is a very good way of expressing yourself, as a language, as a movie. I believe many are going to learn it, not to sell products later, but to express themselves. So the final touch in our work is the author's signature.
Наш платок, выполненный в свободе.
Our handkerchief, made in free batik painting, is ready. Now we have to wait for the paint to dry, remove the grains of salt that created a beautiful effect, and steam it. After the steaming, the handkerchief can be washed. It will serve you for a long time.
Стирать и носить долгое время.